Okay, welcome everybody to day 4 of No Effort is Wasted, and we're actually on day 2 of Elder Kearon's conversion story. And you'll notice that he is not believing, right? It was a 2-year process. We're into the last 6 months, and he's at this point where he's not believing. Okay, so let's continue. Elder Kearon's story. He says, he just couldn't believe, right? And you have to remember from yesterday all the efforts of the missionaries, right? But he couldn't believe. When telling this, he says it really was surprising to me what the Lord was doing, but I didn't know what was going on. I was experiencing a lot of conflict. It was on the one hand beautiful. Can you hear him saying that? But on the other hand, it was so unusual, strange, and unfamiliar. Well, at this point, this is what he says. The missionaries were really invading his space. So, and for him, he says it was deeply uncomfortable. Now, can you hear him saying that? But he continues. This is what he goes on. It was all so beautiful. He keeps using this language about it, all so beautiful, but super uncomfortable. And he says he thinks that's pretty representative of what a lot of people coming into the church actually feel. So he continues as he talks about the efforts with the missionaries, and he said, so they sang. And then again they taught, and they listened, and they listened, and they taught. And they taught me about Joseph Smith. But listen to this. He says, but I still couldn't believe. Interesting. So interesting. He then continues with this. He says, they went away and prayed again and again. And he said, in this visitor center, they had a little theater. And they had me watch films. He said, I watched the films several times. Could you see this, right? They don't know what to do. They don't know how to help it. So he says, I watched the films several times. They were persistent. Love that. And he says, but I was still not believing. Okay, at this point, are you giving up yet? He goes on to say they taught him about the Savior. They were digging deep into their own faith. I love that language. They taught me again and again about Jesus Christ. They taught him that he, Elder Kearon, right, was the Son of God, which I think is significant in the process of conversion, in your identity and coming to know who you really are. Now, these are his words, and you'll love it. He says, how can I believe this? At that point, I still couldn't. They invited me to be baptized. I've been asked, he goes on to say, I've been asked how many times I was invited to be baptized. He says it was many more than 10. It was probably between 15 and 20. Can you imagine? You just can't see this with Elder Kearon, right? He says, I'm not quite sure. But he says, I said no and no and no again. But they were undaunted. Love that language. They were undaunted. They kept going. They remained joyful. And he says this, you can hear Elder Kearon saying this, it was glorious. I think that's absolutely wonderful, because I think at some point in time, in our being undaunted, we get frustrated, but he says they remain joyful. Now, not stopping there, they even baked. That's what he says. And he comments about this baking. He says, looking back on it, he says that he can see the spiritual dimension of every single one of their actions. That's interesting to me. The spiritual dimensions of every single one of their actions. So it says something a little bit about how we move forward and have no effort be wasted. He continues. He says, there was a point while I was being taught that he was going away for 10 days. Now, you got to remember, he still doesn't believe. And he's leaving away for 10 days. And you know panic in missionaries when stuff like that happens. He says, a long way away without benefit of a phone or daily contact. This was long before, the church talked to missionaries about daily contact. So, listen to this. They wrote 10 notes so that he could have a message to read every day that he was away. Can you imagine? That's awesome. And listen to how he describes what they said. They said they were very firm. Now, Patrick, 1 note a day. And so that's what he did. He read 1 note a day. And this is what he says he said, this was wonderful. It was beautiful. It was sweet. And then he finishes with this, but he was still not believing. Can you imagine? Oh, that was amazing. All right, so he returned, and they continued to teach him. Right? And this next thing the Elder Kearon just says, they continued to yearn. Ah, it's so interesting language about those of us that no effort is wasted. Right? They continue to yearn. And he says this. He says this about the mission president at the time. He says President Wendell Ashton was the mission president. Was aware of everyone that was being taught in the visitor center. He would say to them on alternate weeks, "Sisters, you're wasting your time with him." And then the next week, "Sisters, don't give up on him." And then Elder Kearon adds this comment. He says, and that was a fair representation of what he was going through. The ups and downs of what he was feeling and his non-belief. And he said he was sure that they were frustrated too, but they never showed it. Wow, that's cool. They looked for other ways to help, and they looked for other people to help. Amazing. So they introduced him to a wonderful senior missionary couple by the name of the McVeys. And Elder Kearon says the McVeys became beautiful friends, along with other senior couples. And he went to their flat, their apartment, several times to eat with them. The sisters were there too. And this became a very sweet friendship. That's how Elder Kearon describes it. Not satisfied with that, the sisters actually recruited friends for him. He says it's like they roped them in. And they became my friends. And they were, the friends, relentless. Love that language. Not one of these, this is Elder Kearon, not one of these efforts was wasted. But he couldn't see that at the time. Then with all this going on, teaching and praying and fasting, there was a day when they said to me, "Patrick, you are not progressing." Can you see these sisters saying that? If they were, this is Elder Kearon, if there ever was an understatement in the field of missionary work, it was that one. You're not progressing. Here's his reaction. Well, yeah. Okay, here's the deal. We're going to end there today. I promise we'll come back tomorrow, and I promise I'll finish this story because it is so, so good as this continues on, right? No effort is wasted. All right, come back tomorrow, and we'll finish up this story of Elder Kearon's conversion. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.